Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Art Grind podcast. I'm Marshall Jones here with the brilliant Sophia Kayafas. And today we have an extra special treat, an artist that I greatly admire and an art school that I greatly admire. In fact, we are in Studio 7 of the Art Students League right now, when we are going to talk to Bruce Dorfman. And Bruce is an absolutely exceptional artist who has been a teacher at the League for 60 years now, celebrating his 60th year. Bruce was born in New York City. He is an artist teacher who combines painting and assemblage. Bruce has exhibited extensively in the United States and abroad. He has taught at the Art Students League since 1964. Bruce has had more than 50 solo exhibitions.
Wow.
He has received a Fulbright Fellowship, as well as awards and grants from the Pollock-Krasner Foundation, U.S. Department of State, Rockefeller Foundation, New York State Council of the Arts, New York World's Fair, Butler Institute of American Art, and the National Academy of Design. I feel like I need to take a breath after reading all the things you've done.
It's amazing.
I've heard that you grew up in a very artistic family. Your father also shared the same instructor that you did, and you attended classes at this very school with your sister. What was it like growing up in such an artistic family? I could imagine. It sounds like heaven to me. I didn't have that growing up, and it sounds almost perfect, but I can imagine in some ways maybe it felt stifling as well. What was that experience like growing up in such an artistic family?
Well, it was never stifling. I think I was very fortunate, and I certainly didn't think of it as appreciation at the time, as I recall. I just always felt very fortunate, and I think both parents, the household was heroic in that way that you were describing, and in terms of good fortune. My father was a first-generation American. My mother was a second-generation American. My father was an assistant to the writer Thomas Wolfe at NYU. He had intended to be a writer, but when the Depression came, he started writing copy for Women's Wear Daily, and he began painting as well as writing on his own time. My sister and my mother also played the piano to some extent. She was pretty good, made sure that there were piano lessons in the home. We were surrounded by art all the time.
That's amazing.
My parents collected the work of some artists. They had rotating exhibitions of reproductions by artists from art history on the dining room wall, which were changed every week.
Oh my gosh.
We were taken to museums and concerts and plays and so forth. Actually, we were quizzed about classical music with rewards following as well. So there were no particular problems or setbacks with respect to that. But we were also encouraged to do other things as well. So we were very involved with athletics at the same time, particularly during the summer months. And in 1949, I guess it was, my sister, who was about to have a reception up in Portland, Maine for an exhibition of monoprints at the Cove Gallery there, she first went to the Art Students League and had an adult class that children were permitted to enter, and there was a life model too. The rules and stipulations and protocols were completely different at that time. And I followed her. This was the Alice Murphy class. The competition was always with upstairs, the Katz class, Ethel Katz's class, but we were in the Alice Murphy class. And it was very important because she was very, very respectful of whoever you were, whatever age you were. She was very concerned about you as a person and what you were doing. Although she had certain systems that she liked to follow, one was Nicolaides. And it was at that time that there was a great moment. It was at the Art Students League with a 400-pound model, Susie, who was a legend. I first saw my first female nude. And that was really something. And you know, Alice Murphy wanted people to do contour drawings, which meant not looking at the paper, getting the point of your pencil as if it were touching the model and then following it. Well, it could take years to follow Susie. I mean, she was just incredible. And at some point, Murphy called my sister asked my sister to come out of the room and said that she thought that she should talk to my parents because I seemed to be staring and maybe I needed glasses, which I didn't at the time. So that was my great moment starting at the Art Students League. After that, I went up to Woodstock with the understanding that if I were going to, well, my father had also studied at the New School with Kuniyoshi.
So you shared Kuniyoshi as an instructor.
Yes.
And he was at the New School and you were at Art Students League in Woodstock.
He went to the New School to study with Kuniyoshi prior to my having gotten to the league.
Wow.
Kuniyoshi hated the New School. We found that out later on when I became kind of a protege to him and a very close friend of Sarah's subsequently. But and he suggested that if I were going to continue studying, which I absolutely was, that I see about Kuniyoshi. And Kuniyoshi was up in Woodstock during the summer.
Okay.
Well, that was where I went with the understanding that room and board was something that I'd have to cover by myself, and so I had a part-time job at a restaurant up there washing dishes, so I could go to the Art Students League.
Wow.
Yeah, but it was at his suggestion that I work with Kuniyoshi, and I found Arnold Blanche also when I got up there. He was also a very, very great mentor. Just absolutely great. That was during the summer of 1951, and I went back again during the summer of 1952. And the league was decisive at that time. Both parents had continued to be extremely supportive of this whole endeavor. They were very validating, and there was a great deal of communication and conversation about the arts and everything else as well. Came out of an extraordinary home, as I has subsequently found out from listening to conversations that went on. No, it was exceptional.
I heard you tell a story about being a student with Kuniyoshi that I can't wrap my head around. I still don't quite know what this story means. And it was a story of when you were painting some of his still life objects. Could you tell us that story?
Yeah. Kuniyoshi believed very strongly that the subject matter for painting was the point of departure from making the art. A point of departure, that there was a difference, and that should be acknowledged. And there was one morning in particular when he had brought some white ironstone pictures from his own home down to the league and had set up a Kuniyoshi still life. And several of us were very busy drawing and painting that still life. Kuniyoshi felt that we were, in general, keeping ourselves away from the art and attaching ourselves too closely to replicating the still life, which already existed before anybody made a painting of it. And he was hoping that we would try to understand the idea of the subject as a point of departure for something else, art. And it wasn't happening, which is not unusual. And at a certain point, given his own personality and his own history and background, he walked up to the still life and took the ironstone pitchers and smashed them to pieces, which was a shocking moment, a really Zen moment, and left. He just drove away from the school.
He didn't say anything to you?
Didn't say a word, just smashed the peaches. Oh, well, he did, actually. He said, paint that. And left.
That's so intense.
Whatever it meant to anybody else, it was very striking to me, and I felt that was a hell of a sacrifice for him to make in order to make a point, to get us to try to understand something. So I made a painting, and I have it still. It was the last painting I ever did at the Art Students League. It's called White Pictures, and when he came back, I was with him in the afternoon and with Arnold Blanche in the morning. And Arnold Blanche was a very empathetic, a very civilized, well-spoken person who was very considerate of whoever he was talking with. And he appreciated the painting in terms of a wholehearted validation of what had been done, and he had the class look at it and so forth. And there I was, that was the summer of my 16th birthday, listening to all of that. And then in the afternoon, Kuniyoshi came in. He saw the painting. He asked me to go into the adjacent studio, which was being instructed by a Polish artist named Zygmunt Menkes. And the studio was empty that day, and he sat me down with the painting on an easel, and there was no one else there. And for the longest time, it couldn't have been more than 5 or 10 minutes, but it seemed like hours. There was nothing but silence. And then he said, well, he sat on a higher stool. I was on a chair and he was sitting on a higher stool, which was very important, and I absolutely respected that. That's what he did. And he said just this one thing. If you continue to paint like that, by the time you're 30, you'll be dead. And left. No explanation, nothing. And I thought, this must be something fantastic that he's trying to tell me. I've got to try to understand this and think about it, which I did. Kuniyoshi was smoking a pipe, a certain type of tobacco. So when I went into town, I bought the pipe and that kind of tobacco. I bought a red kerchief and put it in my back pocket the way he did, and I tried to make everything as close to how he might have been at that time as possible. Then I went back to my room, which was adjacent to the room of Marisol. We were practically roommates. She had just gotten in from Paris, and she was working with Kuniyoshi also. And there was a door between the two rooms. This was in the town of Woodstock, and I didn't want to bother Marisol with this. She had her own special, very special concerns, and sat down and thought about it, and then I found it impossible to think about it anymore, except that it must be valuable. So I knocked on Marisol's door, and she came in, and we sat down and talked about this, and she said very little, as usual, but that it was something that she couldn't quite figure out, but it must be important. So I went back to thinking about it by myself, and then I thought, well, he must be saying that this painting is conclusive. It's excellent in terms of all of the answers that have been painted into it. It's fully resolved, and there's nothing further. It doesn't ask any questions. It's not open-ended in any way. So, where is this going to go? And that was a lesson learned that has followed me and absolutely imprinted itself on my brain forever. What happens with the creation of a painting is sequential. It goes from the very earliest choices onward, and then in the course of that development, things come up that may have nothing to do with that particular painting, and they have to be paid attention to and not ignored, but retained somehow without overstating in the painting that you're working on, but that the painting you're working on cannot possibly have all the answers and become art. It leads to something beyond that. Otherwise, one gets into the Marcel Duchamp frame of mind and goes and plays chess and stops everything else.
So maybe when he was talking about being dead at 30, he wasn't talking about it in a literal way, but maybe...
Well, that's interesting. When I turned
the artist
30,
inside of you.
I was looking upward and saying, you see, we're still here. And other things have followed. But with all the respect and admiration that I had for Arnold Blanche, I also felt that there was something about Arnold's wholehearted validation that was missing, or he wasn't permitting into the conversation that Kuniyoshi wanted to be sure that it would not get missed. That was crucial, and it turned out for me that it really was crucial.
It's amazing to hear you talk about your mentor with such kind of love and appreciation and of his wisdom, like so long ago.
Yeah.
Now you are here, and
Yeah.
there's something really amazing about having a mentor that can show you their conviction with such a raw, beautiful, vulnerability. I don't know, I've had some teachers like that. They want me to know, this is what matters.
Yeah.
And it just puts you right into the vein, like you're in there, you feel the blood, the art in their blood, and that's what sticks. I don't know.
Well, also, I don't know how it was for you, but growing up, also, I learned somehow to attach a great deal of importance to artists and what they were doing, what they were doing in this world, even if their lives were whatever they were. It was what they somehow came up with, so many of them, and put into this world. And artists were heroes to me. They were baseball players that were heroes, but the artists, there were so many of them, and they were heroes. And when I was around them, I looked at them as heroes. They were spending their lives doing these things, and that was absolutely amazing to me. And the standard, in a way, at the one with the most longevity, were probably the three league artists. There were a couple at the University of Iowa also. They were also out of Woodstock. One of them was, anyway. One was Stuart Eady, who had no acclamation in New York, not much at all. And another one was the great printmaker, Lazansky. They also had a huge impact. I respected these people deeply, profoundly.
There's something about, seeing another artist and seeing that their labor and dedication and this like private, self-imposed lifestyle, and no one's really looking, but there's a mystery that surrounds their lives and the way that they live it, and so inspiring.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's beautiful, even with whatever else may find its way in. Still, how fortunate, how really fortunate. And then the admiration for the Art Students League, and as a kid growing up, this was some kind of a place, and what happened here and what was going on here and so forth. And after all of that, and having heard so much about it at home as well, then to find myself in this place, it was remarkable. It was a pinch me kind of thing, what's going on here. Yeah, and even the way it happened was amazing.
And now you're one of the pillars of this place. How does that feel? One of the giants.
I'm not sure. Pillars do crumble, and depending on really what they're made out of. You can be a pillar one day, and then I don't know. When there's a renovation, it's very interesting. Yeah.
So you think the lesson of that painting was not, well, okay, so you said it like it didn't ask any more questions. You were painting in a way that it was solid and no more questions. And I've heard you talk about drawing as asking a question, like drawing is questioning. And I was thinking about like, but it's a new set of questions with each drawing then, right? Like, because is every time you approach a canvas with that idea that drawing is questioning a brand new set of problems, or do you have a feeling of where you want to go and you've been here before, or is it all new?
Well, I think there is a kind of conceptual idealism at the time, and I think it's possible to realize that when a line or a mark gets put on a space, that it was never there quite that way ever before, and so one sees it in a way that hopefully one can idealize and connect with. And that line then is in relationship to whatever else was already there, the paper and the size and the shape of the paper and the color of the paper and the color of the mark and the kind of mark the tool makes. And then I think what happens is, what if I do this and what if I do that? And will this allow me to begin to approach the type of shape and space and consideration of a composing of that space that I might wish to see, that I haven't yet seen, that I wish to see.
Drawing. Ooh. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Can you... Oh my God. So we're back on.
We're back on
We
now.
were talking about
Okay.
drawing, and I was going to interject right before that alarm went off. I was going to say, drawing is a negotiation with what you're seeing, and I heard you say conceptual idealism, so seeing the mark that it was never there before, as if it was never there before, and really encountering that mark as a moment. And it kind of puts you in a sense of presence of mind. I don't know, drawing can do that. It's an invitation to what is possible.
Well, I think that people, particularly people who, well, it seems particularly people who find themselves in an art school, are generally people who have either very salient or latent choices and preferences with respect to what they like to see, what they need to see, and what experience has given them in terms of what they like a lot. So a person may be very given to the drawings of Leonardo da Vinci and the way that a line was made and how that happened, apart from the backgrounding of Da Vinci's psychology, and whoever the artist may be, or whatever that person may have experienced prior to arriving in that room. And I think it's important to find out what that's been, if it's at all possible, to some extent, and to try to work with that and see if that's not expressible somehow in terms of whatever the point of departure may be, whether it's a bottle or it is a model, another human being or oneself. There's also how the song is sung as well as the song itself. the particular character of one's own voice, where that's coming from, whether it's coming from here or here or here or here. And it's very difficult to do that because it requires very close attention. And one of the things that has stayed with me is the idea of working with each person as if they were the only person in the room, alone. So it becomes very much a question of being patient and somehow finding a way of getting to whatever that salient or latent drive toward a kind of appearance may be, and being able to give that the best possible expression that it can be given at that time anyway, with the limitations that dialogue may present. And there is, one of the things about this place is that historically, and it's still allowable, is that it permits each studio to function in a different way in terms of how the artist comes into the studio to teach, and what it is that they feel is necessary. And that also depends on the choices that the student has made with respect to who they are going to work with. But it has not relied entirely on the accomplishment of particular skill sets. And it has permitted, it has trusted and really respected the artists that it has brought here. There is some idea that when an artist is brought into a place to teach, that artist has something that they understand, hopefully, and can have dialogue about and present in whatever way they need to. And so the students gravitate toward a particular artist to work with that they feel they can relate to and connect with in terms of the artist, and also in terms of what it is that, whatever it may be, that they are bringing to the person who's entered the place. That's very unusual, I think. It's very different than most schools, with all due respect. And for myself, that meant trying to pay as close attention as possible to each particular student, and as if there were no other students in the room. Just what it is with them. What is going on here? What are their preferences? What are their choices? What is it? How does their voice sound? How is it that they are wanting it to sound? Is it possible for it to sound that way, or what? So it's not just the song that's being sung; it's how that song is being sung that's crucial. And I'm sure it's very stressful for them in many instances, and it can be exhausting. And I have I've been here long enough so that it's been since the very first director, Stuart Clonis, to the present time. And from time to time, some director has said, don't you think that it might be a simpler thing if you just address the class? What is it that's going on here? And I'm not able to. I'm just not able to. I don't know how to do that. I'm just not sure. I wrote a book once that was published called Color Mixing, and it was very difficult writing this little book because red and blue are ordinarily, at least we've come up with understanding that red and blue, red in general and blue in general, mixed together make a kind of purple. But with the advent of acrylic colors and other kinds of paints, that doesn't always happen. So color wheels and all of these notions that it was possible to talk about becomes more difficult to talk about because there are all these different variables that are involved. But the league, and I've had directors well, then talk about mixing blue and red, and it makes purple, or yellow and blue makes green, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes this other thing happens, and people need to know about that if it has anything to do with what they're doing. So it gets to be a long 3 hours of stuff. With the pandemic, the league eventually closed, and a lot of artists went online with teaching. That became a huge problem because it meant going on Zoom, and the idea was to present something on Zoom to a class, which I couldn't do. So I had to work after I finished teaching in the morning and then into the afternoon. I would be going from 9 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock at night.
Oh my God.
One person at a time.
Oh my God.
On the internet. One. And that was absolutely mind-boggling. It was mind-boggling. It was almost impossible to walk at the at the end of the day. And the present director came down to my studio, and this inability to walk after all this must have been noticeable by someone, particularly my wife. And he really tried hard to convince me that Zoom would be the thing to do. Maybe it was possible to do this, and I couldn't. I simply couldn't. I didn't know how to do it. Somebody else would come up with their work. It had absolutely nothing to do with what was just happening in the prior discussion. So it just is very interesting. But this is something that I encountered with my mentors. I had 3 of them here after Murphy. Murphy was a very brief time, but it was Kuniyoshi and Arnold Blanche and then Charles Alston. And there were some other instructors, but the league also is built, part of it is built on the notion that if the student doesn't connect with the particular artist that they're working with, there's absolutely no problem going and working with another artist. They can just go do that, and so that it's just changed on the screen that's where they're working. I did actually leave a few of the people that I was working with initially here. One actually painted a painting on my canvas of the model, which I still have, and I'm going to have it at auction at some point. He said, do that, and I figured, okay, what I'll do is, and I took the painting off the easel and went to Charles Alston, and I have the painting still. I'm going to leave it to my kids, and they can bring it to Sotheby's and do something with it.
You could have told that instructor he'll be dead by 30 if he keeps.
He was a venerable league instructor too.
It strikes me, I kind of hearing you talk about teaching in this very personal way that you're engaging with the students, and my mind is always like, okay, I'm talking to an amazing artist, a legend. What can I get out of this to take into my own studio practice? And it seems like there's a real connection to the way that you teach and the way that you make paint. It feels like, I might be presumptive here, but I want to know your thoughts on this. It feels like each student is almost like a replica of each painting that you do. You're trying to take it on its terms, deconstruct it, listen to it, and figure out how to move it forward.
And get the sound of their voice to shine.
Yeah, I think that's so, and it came out originally of an awareness of art that had been done around. I used to look at books of paintings and go to MoMA with my father as a kid growing up, and I began to idealize the art of certain artists, and while admiring greatly the work of other artists that I didn't idealize as much in terms of what I might be interested in. So the earliest exposure to art in general with my father was to the art of the Far East. So I was first introduced to the art of Japan and China and Korea at a very early age, and so I saw the ceramics and the brush paintings and so forth, and I somehow in my mind I understood or thought I understood that this was wonderful, that this was beautiful, and I actually thought it was after repeatedly looking at these things, and then I cut my teeth on American painting that had gone on during the 30s, 40s, and 50s. The 50s a little bit later, and I began to have heroes. And then a very striking thing happened. This was a major thing. You asked about. I noticed on both of you had Piero della Francesca.
Yes.
Well, before I went off to the university, I didn't want to go originally, and I knew older artists in Woodstock, these two that I had studied with, and also Guston and a lot of other artists who were very, very nice to me as a kid growing up. They really were. And they kept saying, well, we didn't go. You should go. You should go. You'll learn about a lot of things, and that'll help your art and so forth. And I didn't think I wanted to go. And Guston had been teaching out at the University of Iowa, and Iowa was getting a reputation for having a degree in art and so forth, and so on. And I said to my parents, well, I would, before I do that, before I go there, I would like to go to Europe. Maybe that's enough. So I did. The summer of my 18th birthday, before going off to the university, I went to Europe. And in the course of that trip, I don't remember just how, but somehow I got to the town of Arezzo, where the Della Francesca frescoes are.
I can't imagine.
At the time, there were not a lot of tourists around. We were talking about 1954, so it was only 9 years after the Second War, and the Italians were a little bit slow about rebuilding things and bringing tourists back into the country. So one hot summer day, I happened to be in Arezzo, and I had no idea that in this particular church, across from where I had just had some hot cocoa or something, that there were these frescoes. So I just walked in, and I remember walking past a very large wooden cross, and then once getting past that, there were these paintings on the walls. Now, understand that because of my own history growing up, I grew up in a secular home, a first-generation secular home. I had no idea what the particular specifics were of the stories that were on those walls, but I did see paintings. So what I saw were compositions of color, unbelievable shapes of different colors related to each other, different shapes related to each other, heads appearing from behind other heads with their shapes, not exactly the way the human skull is, but this shape according to the shape that was next to it and what would look best, and in terms of the arrangement and composition of color as well. And I was absolutely astonished, stunned, and at the same time, it was all figuration. It was. So here was this extreme, acute possibility that this could happen, and I took that back from Europe with me, and for the first from 1954 until around 1972, my paintings were figurative. They were exhibited here in town, and a great enthusiast, fortunately, of those paintings was John Cannaday, who was writing for the Times at the time and lecturing up at the Metropolitan. And he commented that this guy's paintings, it's as if these models, these very beautiful female images are not just female images, it's as if they were still lifes. And I've heard this said about Baltus as well. And I understand that because somehow the thing I came away from with Della Francesca was irrespective of whatever the subject matter may be, it has to be beautiful. This thing has to be beautiful. So the Queen of Sheba, she's not just the Queen of Sheba. There's a blue shape of this thing that she's wearing. It's absolutely extraordinary next to this white thing that's on her head. And he's really paying attention to that. He's not just rendering folds. He's also giving us this blue, which is absolutely incredible. So that never left.
Yeah.
This is my absolute hero as far as artists are concerned.
Wow.
Piero della Francesca. And I can't ever get over it. I have several books, beautiful books of reproductions of that. I've been back and looked at those things and even had the very great honor of being able to go up on a scaffold where there was work being done to repair some of the damage to it and look at it closely, and I felt like I was in a shrine of some sort. There's almost a holy kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's incredible to me that this is what art. This was it. It's not. It's the song, but it's also the singing of that song. The beauty of that, and it's. I remember I've talked to my students about this. There used to be a guy across the street. I don't know what's happened to him, but for years. For a couple of hours every afternoon, he would be walking up and down 57th Street, around where the Brooklyn Diner is now, and he'd be singing and screaming at the top of his lungs, expressing himself, but incoherently. But he was expressing himself, but incoherently. It was not the Metropolitan Opera. It was this guy just expressing himself, and what was he expressing himself about? Well, it sounded like a little like La Boheme, or something was going on there. I don't know what the difficulty was that drove all of this, or the faith or the belief that fed into that. But then I noticed after a while, I was noticing that he was also giving people pieces of paper. And so I got one of those pieces of paper one day, and it turned out that these were prayers that he was offering to people. And I was trying to suggest to my students that it's not simply a question of expressing yourself. I mean, you can't help but do that. No matter what you do, you're expressing yourself. But see if it's not possible to get it to become coherent in some ways. So somebody, if possible, knows what the hell is happening, so something's discernible there. There's a difference between what he's doing and what Caruso was doing.
Oh my God. I remember somebody told me that once. They're like, anyone can express themselves and roll around and be crazy, but an artist has to go to the crazy place and come back.
Yeah.
All of this talk about like seeing these religious pieces and maybe not understanding that context on a theological level, but reveling in their beauty and their mystery. I don't know, that really resonates with me. I have a lot of experience looking at icon paintings and Byzantine art, and I don't know, I had written this question down. I want to
beautifully
the
done
Khalil
too.
Gibran one.
Oh, yeah.
Khalil Gibran, from his book, The Prophet, he writes a chapter about work. And one of the most beautiful sentences in that chapter is, you work with love and you bind yourself to yourself and to God. And I just find that really moving. And Marshall said, okay, well, maybe that means you're working with integrity. But I think it's more than that. I think that when we're working with love, we participate in some kind of divine order in the chaos, and we fold ourselves into life's purpose of becoming. And no matter how much planning we do, at some point along the way, we're going to lose ourselves in our plan and serve something beyond. And maybe that's the composition or something, but it feels like that maybe that's what you're responding to in Francesco's work. It's like he lost himself in the work. He's serving something higher. And I don't know, what do you think of all that?
Well, I agree with it. I think that is this, that what was being described and what you are referring to, for me, it seems to me, is inherent in the act of creation. It's possibly the one thing that we can do that in some minuscule way, intentionally or inadvertently emulates something that's beyond our comprehension. But it has something to do with the act of creation itself. I see the closest thing that I can think of that it's possible, that I find it possible to discuss, is given what you're talking about now, is the relationship between conception that occurs with the birth of a human being and conception that leads to the creation of a work of art. And what happens when preconception enters that realm and tries to attach itself to what has happened without having a look at what has happened and trying to understand it in its own terms and the potential for what the fulfillment of it may happen to be. We do this. A lot of it. This happens to children, and at that point, and a lot of this happens to artistic things that might conceivably become art, if they're given a chance at the point at which conception starts to become delivery, and there's something that appears there. I'm just concerned about there's bound to be the imposition. I mean, these things, art and people come into this world, but what happens at that point, and how I think something has to be noticed with respect to how this thing that's coming into the world varies away even slightly from other things which it may also resemble, so that it's not made to be like these other things inevitably and lose some particular spark that I think Gibran was also referencing. I think it's there, but this is a very messy thing to try to work through, and very, 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 really, really complicated.
I just hear that you're having reverence for being present and really listening to what that image needs, or the student, or in your analogy, the baby. It's a very specific thing that's different from things around it, even though it may look like something you've encountered before. You have to encounter it as if it's the first time, and that takes a certain amount of patience and a gravity and I don't know, that's what I hear you saying.
And a pleasure too, and enjoyment.
Yeah.
I think the differences are potentially, if not immediately, at least as valuable as the similarities. I think how things vary one from another are potentially very great. And
6%.
It's just, if there's any way of honoring that, and if that needs to be given expression, if somehow it turns out that finds its way into the necessity for expression, then to assist in the possibility of that, if that's at all possible, if that can be done, I don't know if it can be helped at all.
But it's the striving for that,
The
right?
attempt.
Yeah, it's idealizing the possibility of that. Guston, there's a book that he takes the authorship of called I Paint What I Want to See. And I get that. My own way of expressing this is I have a need to see something that isn't quite already there. So if it's possible to put it there, to do that with the understanding that it's not going to happen, but keep going anyway. Kuniyoshi thought I had tried to make it happen. That was that 30-year-old thing.
But
Potential to put it there.
It I love the way that the three of us are here talking about.
Oh, this is wonderful.
Yes.
Great.
to talk about these very important, very reverential aspects to art making. And indeed, I feel like that sings to me off your work. Sophia mentioned it as, this was so evocative, when your work to her feels like when a train passes you and it sort of sucks you in, that feeling of like whoosh, like
you
you're
feel,
looking
yeah,
at
you feel the air suck you, and you're like, wow, that's someone specific.
And I'm like, that can't come easy. That comes from experience, character, all the things we're kind of talking about. But then the reality is, these things go out into the world, and it's up for anybody to comment on, almost like a child all of a sudden sending it out into the world. And look, I'm sure there's people who go to see the frescoes of Piero della Francesca, and they're like, oh, the head's too small on that one, or just these very minor concerns that aren't even concerns. And I wonder, in your experience, what are some things that people say about your work that they get right and that they get wrong, in your opinion?
Oh, that's a good question.
Well, are we talking about things that get said publicly or privately or a combination of both or all of these?
Combination of both. Just whatever you think you hear that maybe be like, yeah, that's what I'm going for, or that you hear that's like, no, that's not quite it.
Well, I have a view. It seems to me that the choices one makes to give expression to, and that one does as an artist, are inherently about setting marks that one makes in relationship to one another that somehow will bring on a whole of some sort that gets left at some point when it's decided to leave it, to let it be. And I trust that those choices and relationships, however they configure, whatever the configuration may be, in finally, that they carry the emotional and spiritual content of what's there, of the art. And I trust that completely, so that there have from time to time been comments made or critical things said that seem to suggest that the work is the work of a formalist. And but I think that could also, if one didn't know the story of the Della Francesca frescoes, that could be said about him too. So that's a hero, and I hide behind that. And that could also be said about the Mucci 6 Persimmons painting, And I hide behind that also. I mean, where's the tabletop? It's not there. That's okay. We're going to be all right. The painting is, the persimmons aren't going to land on the floor. So it's. I think
fantastic.
one of my written admonitions for whoever my students happen to be is not to worry about expressing themselves, but that will inevitably happen no matter what they do. It just becomes a question then of how they give that form, how the voice causes that to emerge. But they will be expressing themselves. The quality of expression per se doesn't just come from the subject matter. And that was pointed out to me very well at one point by an art historian who then became one of the directors of the Smithsonian, subsequently was Roy Sieber at the University of Iowa. And Sieber, Professor Sieber he said at one point, and I've never forgotten that, if it were the subject matter that determined the importance of a work of art, or the expressive quality of a work of art, then one would have to say that automatically a painting of Mary would be intrinsically more important as art than a painting of a particular still life by, say, Bonnard. And that's not necessarily so. So it's not the subject matter. The subject matter carries all of this other. If one pays attention to the reverence that was put into the...
I love what you're saying. I really resonate with what you're talking about right now.
Well, you do very well with this. I've noticed that.
I just feel like everything you're saying about the sound of the voice, and it just speaks so much to this expression of the self and finding the self and owning it actually as an act of vulnerability and putting it out there and someone witnessing them and seeing that work, and that galvanizes the self in a certain way. And I love that you're trusting this. Anyway, sometimes as the maker, we notice that we've struck gold in a way in that originality. We've polished the mirror just enough to see a glimmer of ourselves, our real selves. And I guess I was wondering, if I can find the end of this question. So sorry. What can you talk about a moment in your practice when you knew that you had unearthed something true about yourself that had been there the whole time?
Well, I think that probably, in some instances, it may be very difficult. There are areas of preference and special concern and likes and dislikes that are possible to identify, both in terms of what they may be at any given time and how they might present themselves or be presented. And this is something that artists will do. Artistic people, not necessarily, but artists will run the risk of doing that. It seems to me it becomes very important for them to do that, but for whatever reasons, I don't know. I don't know that anybody's ever been able to make that clear, but it's a very risky thing because one may do that, and it reveals But it reveals also a great risk. There may be approbation, and there may be value attached to it, or it may be dismissed entirely, or disliked, or in some particular instance, or worse. Anything can happen, and somehow artists will risk that. That seems to be something worth risking, for whatever the reasons may happen to be. If artists are goal-oriented, I don't think it's at all clear what it is that, and I think also that how an artist sees that or thinks about that, that may change somehow, or how that gets looked at or seen may change. I think something that's very important that gets missed a lot, but sometimes a lot by ourselves as artists, and certainly by any audience that there is at any given time or some particular point in history. I think with art, it's very important for the artist, at least the artist, to pay very close attention to what actually is emerging in front of them, what is actually there. What often happens is, in looking for something other than that, that gets missed. You go right past it. And there is this incredible thing that's there, but it's not this other thing that one was looking for. But I think that artists like Leonardo da Vinci or Piero, when he saw that worked, but rather than that, even though that was closer to that than that, he went there because he was looking at the needs of the thing there rather than what was necessary for the count to stay alive over there.
That is
it's
such
different.
a profound way to say that. I mean, I've never really thought of it in that way.
I hear it as humility. I'm hearing a conversation with humility at the heart of it. I don't know if that's what you heard, but I'm curious.
Well, I'm wondering, so what's there then is, like you pointed, it's a relationship that's may not necessarily be there, and by there I'm meaning the referent, whatever that is. But maybe there's a spark in your brain, maybe there's a fizziness, maybe there's something worth pursuing. So then the question arises, do you guard what's there, or do you have to keep pushing it forward at risk of what was there?
I think it's a mixture.
Okay. How do you know?
You don't. I don't think there's any way to know for sure. I think, finally, this whole thing, it seems to me, it resides in an act of faith of some sort. Maybe this is so, maybe it's not so, but this is what needs to be, and hopefully things will turn out well. But to know for sure, I think to be certain to know for sure when something's being created, something that wasn't exactly there before, that I'm not sure we're capable of that. So one goes for this and this thing, and I think that there is some ideal condition that's part of that act of conceptualizing, and while one may reference that, it seems to me that one continues on at the same time keeping an eye on that as well as that, both things, and seeing if it's not possible to somehow come up with some order of thing or a composition of thing that will be inclusive of both the discovery and this ideal thing which has been following you around
God.
forever.
Would you say that kind of is like an ongoing probing question that you find yourself coming across in your studio? Like, is that, if you had to simplify it? Because I feel like you're saying it so clearly. I love it.
Well, I think for me, it's an ongoing thing. It is, and that can be complex to say the least. But I think that I'm not sure. I think that changes with whoever the artist is. Right, yeah. In terms of what their personality needs to have in order to do this thing. I think don't you think we sort of latch on to what will be helpful in getting to something? There's something that one has learned or acquired or picked up or trusted or risks trusting, so that you can go on. Otherwise, I think it's very possible. Once let's say you select a canvas of a certain size and shape, a certain kind of canvas that's stretched over it or whatever it is, and as artists, you make a mark there, and what's to keep you from just saying, okay, we're done, which some artists have done. We're done. That's beautiful. That's it. We're done. That's possible, and I think that has happened. I think there's something to that, however valuable that may be to whoever it is. There's something, I think, as an artist, as a human being. Generally, what goes on over there is not a completely intellectual process that happens. So it might be enough, this red mark, but.
You have to invite mystery into this process. It has to be a part of it. There's no way around it. And I love how he does it. He strips it back. He keeps it right in the front of his mind. It's so simple in that way. It's right there. And I find that just so refreshing, and I don't know, I love that invitation. Thank you for making the work you make. Like, truly.
It's a risk, right? You're trusting yourself constantly.
Well, whether you should or not, it goes on. Oh boy, what I did.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Sure.
And I've heard you say that you don't really make a distinction between abstract or figurative art. In that, okay, I heard you say something kind of confusing to me once. It's along these lines, but you said, let's see, you make no distinction between abstract and representational, and that all art is abstraction, and the more it acknowledges that, the more realistic it is.
I love that.
So that's a brain twister to me. What exactly are you meaning by that?
Well, it's sort of like the experience of the Della Francesca frescoes. Let's say that you don't know the subject matter, but there's something going on there that in a way adds up to that subject matter. But the subject matter of the piece of work, finally, as art, in my view, capital A, what finally is crucial about what's being looked at is the art that's there. And once that's there, if one feels that that's there, it's not just, it's more than a demonstration of this or that or something else. For example, I've heard Piero della Francesca, whole books have been written about his ability as a mathematician and his ability to demonstrate perspective. This is not the crucial thing about della Francesca. Philip Guston talked about Della Francesca being one of his heroes. And that's Guston. And I get it, because the art is there. It's how a particular red, is placed next to a particular blue, and the summation of the whole thing may be an enunciation. It may be. It may very well, but it may not be. It may be the relationship, just that, the relationship of shapes and colors and textures and so forth. The paint, it's possible finally that the art is as art is about itself as art, and then if the subject matter is expressed as art,
if we can get out of the way long enough.
all of it abstract. It's all of it abstract in the first instance. That is, it's made up of what's there. It's what's there, not what's there. What's there is what that is. What's here is paint and canvas or whatever. It's all of that put together. And this is not that. This is something that may have something to do with that, but it's this. So this then becomes a different kind of reality than that. And I think where that is not paid attention to, where that is overlooked, I think there was a very great example of what can happen. There was a book called Psychoanalysis in Art by Ernst Christ was his name, and the subject of the book was a man who was completely psychotic and was under house supervision. His name was Hans Messerschmidt. And
sculptor.
Yeah, and he made
great.
heads.
I love those.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, absolutely incredible what this guy could do. But the thing is, what Messerschmidt came up with was not art. The guy could have been working in a hospital or something. It was not, but you could appreciate what the guy had done. It was remarkable, but he was unable to differentiate between these heads he made and Mr. So-and-so over here, which is a serious issue, and got him into this place. So I think that artists like Da Vinci or Rubens or whoever it may happen to be, Motherwell, there is a distinction made between the ultimately abstract character of this thing that's been done here and what it's made up of, and this thing that's over here. And it strikes me then that whatever the subject may happen to be, whatever that may happen to be, that when it becomes art, it may have been inspired by the subject, it may have been the point of departure for making the painting, but it's still a painting.
To acknowledge the artifice of it.
Yeah, it's still that. It's just this other thing.
And that's the silly part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's an entity. It's an entity. It is an entity. It's a new thing here, and does it fulfill its own terms as a creation? Does it fulfill its own terms? Can it survive? Can it live? Can it sing? So I sort of see it all that way. When I say that, what I mean is, whatever the subject matter is, if it's possible for it to come through the formal relationships that cause it to become art, the fulfillment of its own terms somehow, then as I understand it, that is an abstraction. Now, there are some artists, and I'm inclined to agree with this, not that it matters, I'm not sure that it matters, who feel that somehow the most realistic art is art that's realistic about itself as art.
Okay.
Yeah,
another can of worms.
I don't think it's time to put the Sistine ceiling in storage. I don't. There's a lot going on there.
But I come from a much more like strictly representational, very hard mimicking background. The goal.
But it doesn't, it's identifiable as yours.
What's that?
It's identifiable, though, as your work.
Yeah. But I'm wondering, I feel like this way of thinking, to me, feels very exciting, in a way very freeing, but I would imagine some people just spend their life copying certain things. Maybe it would be the thing that would cause Kuniyoshi to smash those vases, right? There's something very dead about it. And I'm trying to put my finger on when then does something become art? Because it could, like you said, it could be very simple means. It could be, it feels like an unanswerable question.
Well, I think he's talked about, I'm going to answer this. I think that you've said that when you're expressing your personhood through that, the sound of which you describe, it's the way you describe the apple.
So
it's the way you describe the apple. Yeah. It comes out despite yourself that makes it unique, makes it art, and makes me feel something. It's more than mimicry.
Yeah, exactly. Your apple has identity. It has identity, and I think that art does that. There's a lot of artistic work that's out in the world, more than art, I think. But the issue of discovery of identity within that, it's not the same. It's not like something else, and it has clarity with respect to the identity that's there. And I think that's an issue. That's a big deal. I think this is part of what causes totalitarians and dictators to shoot artists and poets the first chance they get after there's a change of some sort, because this is an issue, this is a problem. Here are these things that are being made that suggest that this is somehow an individual who considers herself or himself apart from things. This is a misunderstanding, of course, but I think that's what happens, and so Lorca gets shot in the back of the head. What's going on? What's going on? We can't have this.
Get in line.
Yeah.
Wow, that is a lot to think about. Because that's what we're all here for. That's why I do it, you do it, and you do it. Because maybe we could all show each other what we're doing and learn about each other.
And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Absolutely, yes. So there's a responsibility tied into this. This is not autopilot. This is not copying. This is showing people a glimpse of humanity.
Yeah, and that it's possible.
And that it's possible.
Possible, and still be a part of this world, in if one chooses that. I think artists in general have a very hard time making any kind of separation or distinction between what happens in their studios in that universe or sanctuary that they occupy, and then what happens when they open the door and go outside, and it's not the same, and that gets very hard for a lot of us, and so artists resort to all sorts of things to try to get past that or beyond that or deal with that or something, but there is that separation that occurs, and I think this is a hard thing, to be part of a collective of some sort, a society, somehow, even in the margins, and at the same time be willing to risk what can go along with all this while that's happening, and while you're living and breathing in your sanctuary or whatever it is,
right. I was telling Marshall, I think that really great art is an attempt at mediating conflict.
Oh boy.
And I think at the heart of art is a conflict that's just unresolvable. I feel that in my work, but I was wondering what conflicts encompass your work, if any.
Well, I think that it's interesting to me. There was an instructor show when the League was up in Woodstock, And at that point, I was working with the figure, and partly because of the time, that particular point in time and place, I was very fortunate it was received well. But Stuart Clonis resided on the grounds of the League in Woodstock during that era, during that period. And I remember him going up to look at the work in the instructor's show. And he called me over and he said something to me that I have never quite heard that since. He said, what I see here is not simply something that's beautiful. I see something that's really in crisis. Which, oh my God, I've been found out. That's, oh my God, was it, you mean you can see it? And I think it was the oversubscription to something that it was a function of attempting to realize, as art, by creating it as art. That's very, very complicated. That really is. So I think the biggest issue has been risking the absence of an ideal in some particular part or all of the overall statement in a piece of work. With time, I've become much more willing to let that happen. So maybe this doesn't work. Maybe this is problematic, but it's an interesting problem. I'm going to leave it like that. That has really been something. I think artists, maybe idealists in general, but I think certainly artists who are informed by an idealistic emotional streak. I think it may be very possible to run into the kinds of difficulties in and out of the studio that get carried into the work no matter what.
Yeah.
It gets there. Well, I'll never forget that episode. That was really a comeuppance, and boy, those were some kind of figurations. I'll show you those sometime.
Yeah, I'll have to see them for sure.
Yeah, well, I was with Kennedy Galleries at the height of all of that, and Kennedy Galleries. Most of all of their artists were figuration, and I was sort of like the kid on the block in that place. And that's where most of what when it was during a period of about 10 years early on. That's where it came from. I don't think the work is any different now. That's my view, but it's because of this abstraction notice.
Right.
I still think it's the same thing, but it's arranged differently.
Yeah, I've heard you say that there's a figure under everything you do.
Yeah. It's just where I think this is where it comes from. I think artists who say no, that's not it, and then there's some long artist statement about Mars and Pluto and
I've read those.
I'm not so sure about that. I'm more inclined to agree that this is what lies within all of this other. It's that. It's interesting. Somebody should do a piece of work about this. Should do a volume of work right about this. I don't think this has been dealt with really. It's been touched, but not really gotten into. I think that's very very real part of all of this. Yeah.
Well, it feels like we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about more about your teaching as well. And you've taught Ai Weiwei and Bob Dylan, and I can't imagine what it would be like. Because I assume Dylan was at Woodstock, right? And it was
Dylan lived practically next door. We were living on adjacent roads, and that was between 1964 and 1972, and we both sort of departed Woodstock around that time. But we during that period of time, we were very close. It was almost a daily friendship. Most of that time was spent in my studio, and we were very good friends and very, in a lot of ways, very interdependent, and
wow.
And a very interesting person, really. Apart from the persona, the public persona, the person is very, very different than the persona.
I wonder in what ways.
Well, he always said flat out that he did not consider himself an artist and should not be appreciated as an artist. That he considered himself a performer or entertainer, and I don't think that was just a kind of modesty. I think it came from his history, his background, his family, and so forth, and also. When we first became friends, it was very soon after he had that big motorcycle accident coming back home one day, and that had an ongoing, from that point on, a very ongoing impact on how he saw himself. And initially, that was in terms of trying to live out something that he had grown up with, which was a kind of very middle class, have children and have a solid marriage and so forth and so on. But anyway.
What did you think of his paintings?
I think they're terrible. I think they still are. Bob is very opportunistic about borrowing. He is. And
You built a career on it.
Yeah, he's very conservative about what he aspires to, but he has an interesting way of getting that out. But initially, it was Sarah, his wife at that time, and most of the three children that he had during that time, apart from the one he adopted from her prior marriage, it was Sarah who actually initiated or caused something to happen with respect to his having said something about maybe he'd also like to paint, and she gave him his first materials, which he brought down to the studio, and so we set him up and tried to introduce him to certain things about oil paint and brushes and palette and so forth. And initially, his aspiration, it was a very interesting thing. His initial aspiration was to try to make a painting like Vermeer. That lasted for one afternoon. And he went from that to Van Gogh. and then after an afternoon with that, he went someplace where he was very comfortable. He went to Chagall.
I could see that what he does, for sure.
It allowed him all of these ideas. And he did a painting. This was the first coherent painting, in my view, that was based on the song All Along the Watchtower. He tried to make a painting of that song. And it was very Chagall-like in character. And it was okay. It was a very naive-looking, sort of outsider art-looking kind of thing. But he would plunge into it. I mean, there was no kind of,
He went for it.
He went for it, yeah. And then he did another painting we did together, Jerry Saltz doesn't know that, and Saltz wrote something about this painting, reproduced it. He made it all up. It had nothing to do with what happened. Bob decided to do a painting which he was going to give to the magazine called Sing Out.
Okay.
It was of a guy sitting on a chair playing a guitar with a cowboy hat on, and another guy looking through the window at the guy sitting at the guy inside, and which was a painting of us, and it was something we discussed, about the possibility of getting a view of what you were doing by either looking at it through a handheld periscope or going outside and looking through a window at what you were doing, so you could get some kind of detachment. So the painting was this, and we did it together. And you can see where Bob's hand leaves off and where this other hand is getting involved because the paint is on differently. I think all of this will come out in the wash.
Was he a receptive student? Was he?
Well, but we were doing this as friends, not as students, and this was 3 or 4 times a week.
Wow.
In the afternoons, and we talk about a lot of things, and it was all over the place. But then I left Woodstock and went across the river, and Bob left and came down to Manhattan, and we spent some time together after that, which is memorable. But I think his interest in painting and the arts otherwise is genuine. I mean, it is genuine, and I think what attaches itself importantly to whatever artwork he's done is he's done it. He did it. I think the stuff that's going up is I mean, his hero, his artistic hero, no, really, was Frederick Remington.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yep. Yep.
That's got that kind of middle class.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And inwardly, the ideal living condition was a small home with a white fence with kids. This is away from all this. But he's very well read. He's extremely well read.
Tell that from his music.
Yeah, he is a very generous person, actually, and generous in a lot of ways. I think it's very hard, I think, for that particular personality to figure out what to do from this or that from one day to the next. So a lot of it is what carries him along. It has its own momentum, and he lets that happen. He lets that be. So this is very, very unusual. It's not something that it's hard to find that kind of thing if one is even looking for it. And on top of that came a whole a particular era of writing that really had a lot to it and underneath it, and that informed it. That was based on a wide range of having read a lot into the world's literature, and also a very, very deep involvement in biblical verse.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very heavily so. And he was a guy who kept a gun, a rifle by the front door. His best friend in town was the local sheriff. He was a supporter of George Wallace.
I did know that, yeah.
Yep.
He's caught some heat for
This
that.
is really complicated. Wasn't necessarily opposed to the war in Vietnam. Was more passive about it, but had some kind of overreaching sense of what he felt was right and wrong, and ridiculous and also ironic. And he wanted to address that somehow. I mean, Bob's heroes were people like I think the big hero was Guthrie.
Woody Guthrie.
Yeah, that was really the big hero. Yeah, but it was a close relationship, and the children were close to each other as well. Actually, that's how we met. I mean, we were both walking. I was walking my daughter Lisa to the bus stop in Birdcliff, and he was walking his adopted daughter Maria to the bus stop. And we met that way, and got on real well.
Well, that's something real interesting about like the life of an artist. You had mentioned at one point that you need to have a romance with drawing, not unlike another romance. And I sort of comically in my head thought about, well, there's going to be some infidelities there, like how do you manage, looking back, all the demands, because there's
a difference.
full-time job as a teacher, full-time job as an artist. Oftentimes, full-time job as an artist is, the demands are so insane. It's nonstop.
You have multiple jobs,
scraping by, and then putting a family and children and sustaining yourself. How do you feel like you managed all of that?
Well, no, I didn't feel like I was managing anything. I think a lot of it was the circumstances were very much inspired by the home I grew up in. It was just a part of the day. My family, we were always been very fond of what each other were doing, and it was as important to ourselves individually as we were to each other. Somehow there always been an empathy and understanding of what each other were doing, including myself. No, I mean I'm fortunate. I have a wife who teaches here and does it well, and she's a terrific artist. She's absolutely remarkable. Her thinking has a ferocious sense of integrity that attaches to it, and I love that. The children, they have each of them. They're each of them wonderful and doing wonderful, just making great, wonderful things. My oldest son is the head of the Human Rights Department in Aalborg, Denmark, at the university there, and my oldest child, Lisa, she taught for many years in Connecticut, gifted children, and she's also a labor attorney. She's now retired, and my youngest was the senior book designer for Simon & Schuster, and she's out in Santa Fe, and we see each other from time to time, and it might have been yesterday or it might have been 2 years ago. Doesn't matter. It's of a piece. I've always been able to love art. And I feel like it's been reciprocated endlessly, 24 hours a day, forever. That's the hard thing to try to. I mean, there are artists who try to emulate that in their personal lives, and there's a point where this is just you can drive everybody crazy if you did that. That's another kind of bubble. So it's a little different. It's a little bit different, but in very, very profoundly important and lovable ways. So.
Did you ever think about quitting art?
I at one time when I was at the University of Iowa, I went out as in the art department as an art major. But I knew the guys that were teaching there, and after about a year and a half, it was like I felt like I was wasting my education at the college. I mean, they have so much going on out there, and so, you know, Edie and Lazansky, they both suggested, you should follow, what your impulse is. You'll be okay as an artist, and at night, you come in and work, do your work. So I thought, uh-oh, and I went to the head of the department, who was a major esthetician at the time, a guy named Lester Longman, and Stephanie knows who this guy was, and I thought when I went to tell Dr. Longman that I was going to leave the art department, that he would say, no, don't do that. We'll try to accommodate something. He didn't. He said, good luck. That was a fantastic moment. That really was. So I went across the river and majored in an entirely different subject that I found very, very interesting, which has been a great help to me.
What was that?
As an artist, and certainly teaching here at the League and any other place we've been. Well, I did my final work, my paperwork, in personality disorders. That has saved me here.
Is that like a psychology?
Absolutely. I can just sit quietly and think, oh God, we'll get through this somehow.
Well, it's a lot like managing different personalities as part of the job of the teacher, right?
Oh boy. Oh boy. Yeah. Well, I got offered a job when I graduated the university. I got offered a job at the University of Wisconsin. They were interested because this was a guy who had written this. My thesis was nonverbal communication among children.
Okay.
So here was a guy who did this thing, whatever worth it had, and he could make pictures too.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
The University of Wisconsin had an interest in, but I turned it down, and it was a really big. That was one of the big question marks for me, because what I did was there was a serious problem going on in another part of the world at that time, and the draft existed. There was a draft going on, and I either, if I had gone to Wisconsin, I would have had a deferment as a graduate student,
okay,
or teaching graduate student, but otherwise this other thing. So I decided to try to be the master of my own fate. I didn't want to wind up in that other department. I didn't really want that, but this was the alternative, or go to Canada. I didn't want to go to Canada, so I enlisted.
Oh, you enlisted?
Yeah, I enlisted.
Oh, wow.
This is, I don't even want to discuss this. I don't.
Okay.
I don't. But at the end of it all, before I was finally completely let out of this thing, I met somebody who was in a similar situation. There's a very similar set of circumstances, and we have remained friends, very, very close friends to this day. That was Larry Poons.
Oh yeah, okay. Another League instructor.
Larry, at the time, at night, I can remember him pulling a pad of paper out of his shirt and showing me little drawings he had made on a little lined pad. He was just out of the music conservatory in Boston, and he was doing these things, and they were the precursor to the paintings that brought him into the art world. And this is a friendship that's been a very loyal one for a very long time.
It's beautiful.
And that's an interesting thing, because do you know him at all from around?
I know his work, and I would recognize him, but I haven't had
But you haven't been around his classroom or anything when he is here. His persona is entirely different than he is. It's that again. It's what he presents in class or in public. It's a totally different person. Totally different.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He's a lovely person. very, 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 very sweet and loyal person, very nice, and very polite and courteous and all of that. And you know, but in general, this is not understood. But this is. It's been that long. It's been that long, and it happened under those circumstances. That was remarkable. That continuing relationship.
Well, Bruce, I've got one last question for you. Maybe Sophia has.
This is amazing what's going on here.
You're so great.
It really is, you know. Boy, you know, you ought to get a Pulitzer for it. You should. You should.
It goes well when we have interesting guests. That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
Wow.
But my final question is, how do you define success as an artist?
I don't know how to define it. I don't know if the word applies in any. I'm not sure how it applies. I think deep down it has something to do with people caring that you did anything or are doing anything. I think, you know, people. I think a lot of artists they don't get that, and sometimes when they do, they don't even realize it that it's happening. I think in general it can be a very exotic experience. I think I've been very fortunate. I really do. I think there are degrees of this kind of thing and so forth, but to be paid attention to in terms of you know, in general. I think that's amazing. I think, you know, I think it's very possible to spend an entire lifetime pursuing some form or another of validation of just, you know, that what you're doing, you know, it's not it's something other, and it may have some value. It may add something. If anybody feels that way, my God, I think that's a huge success. Incredible. So I just think it has something to do with that, having an awareness that there is some caring about what you may be doing or have done, or that's amazing. Really.
Such a beautiful answer.
I don't know who's prepared for that, for that kind of thing. I don't know. But looking at it with a question being asked like that, I don't think it's the first time I've ever been asked a question like that. I think that's a success. My God, what in the world?
So I remember somebody saying, like, comedy is one of the most noble arts because how brutal it is. Because that idea that you're seeking a validation through our work, or someone would see us. It's, I care about what you're making. When you're in front of an audience and you're doing stand-up, you can tell.
That's incredible.
If they care or
incredible.
not. It's like very immediate. You're tethered to them.
That's fantastic.
And I don't know, I think there's something noble about that. And I like how you voiced it as well.
Do you think it has something to do with validation?
I think it does. I think it has to do
How
with...
about you? Do you think that's where it's coming?
Feeling seen, or...
I think so. I think connection is definitely the root of a lot of our activity. A lot of the impetus for our activity. I think some people get hurt by that. I think of like, J.D. Salinger, who, gets famous off Catcher in the Rye, writes a few other books not as well received, and just retreats and holds all his art to himself, doesn't let anybody read it. Mm-hmm. And I think he had a desire to connect. He didn't like it and withdrew. and I'm sure there was validation in there, but I think it's complicated for us too. And your answer, it makes me think how there is something very real in what you said. Like, I connect with your art, I appreciate it, and I do find that valuable to both you and me, you know? Mm-hmm. But I think I just don't, I'm nervous when some people who don't find connections that are harmful, don't find validation, and there's something, you know, it's almost like this beautiful thing gets a little crushed or something,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that longing to connect and be witnessed.
Yeah, I think that's what we do.
And that idea that them seeing you makes you more real or something. I don't know. And maybe it's not worth anything, but I think the work isn't done until it's seen. I don't think it completes the communion of the whole, it's not even done. I think it has to be seen.
Huh.
Even for you to just watch someone look at it for 5 seconds, I think that could be enough. It doesn't need to be 10,000 people. It doesn't even need to be 50 people. Maybe just one other person could be enough.
Wow, I think that's, yeah. 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 Even some of the past, you know, the Van Gogh syndrome. There was his brother.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh God.
Eternity's Gate. Have you seen this film?
I didn't see it.
Oh, it's
Oh
phenomenal.
boy.
Heartbreaking. Anyway, thank you so much for
Oh no, thank
speaking
you.
with
This
us.
was
This
fantastic.
amazing.
This is terrific. You're really good at this. You really are.
We love it. We love it.
Wow.
I feel like we make a good team.
Wow.
And
Really something.
thank you for the interview, but also thank you for providing inspiration to people like
Yeah.
me and a lifetime of really beautiful art.
Yeah, likewise. Likewise. Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you. You can shake your hand.